I think I got a new favorite running back. Let's go inside the locker room. Lot to get into. 2 weeks and change till the draft. Let's see. It is the locker room, number one source for Texans digital content. I am Landry Locker. Shout out to Cody Stutes for his earlier stream. You can hear us both on S&L. We got some big stuff planned. Big draft party planned for the final day of the draft on Saturday. Location. Excited about it. We'll let you know that, though, by Friday. We're going to have the mega stream as well. And I think every year you guys have been following this channel. This channel's been going for 3+ years strong. A lot of you listen to me on the radio as well before that. I think I like a new running back. I think a new running back has caught my eye. And I think sometimes you tend to overanalyze things during this time of the year. I think I'm just seeing the light. I think I'm just putting everything together, and there's such thing as too much information. I think we've got the perfect amount of information. A running back that I am open to. We'll get to in just a sec. But first, I kind of want to get in on the wide receiver talk, because we've talked about the wide receiver stuff for a while. Also going to talk about who's making the decisions. Is it Nick Caserio? Is it D'Amico Ryans? Is it a combination of everything? Do they want the same thing? I know they're going to insist that they never had a single disagreement and they agree on everything. But at some point, you got to think D'Amico leans defense. And you got to think Caserio with his boy Nick Caley got to be thinking about the offense. And if they are thinking offense, how much of a say does Nick Caley have? It's his system. He's the one calling it. But how much are they going to trust him? Something to think about. But let's talk about the wide receiver position first. And today is one of the best days of the year when it comes to the draft, because today is the day when the beast came out. And that is Dane Brugler's draft manual. It is usually around 600 pages, and it is more information than you even know what to do with. Like, you can figure out more information in this thing than you could ever dream of when it comes to prospects. There's not just the in-depth scouting reports, but there's extra information about these guys, details, all that type of stuff. And it is the perfect final piece to draft prep. And it's one of the most well-respected things that happens over the course of the draft. I'm fortunate enough to have gotten to work with Dane a little bit in past cities, and the job that he does is great. And let's just be honest, like, if you're not familiar with it, you would say, well, man, Landry there really must be something in it for Landry to be talking about that. Nah, it's just the best resource for draft nerds. It's just the best resource for draft nerds. And I saw Adam Schefter, who works for ESPN, even shouted it out today. It's about as in-depth as you get. And in reading it, I found one thing very interesting that Dane Brugler had, and that was his wide receiver rankings. And I will pull up the wide receiver rankings that Dane has. And I kind of skipped the quarterbacks, because who gives a rat's ass about quarterbacks at this point? It's kind of nice to stay out of that. But I mean, he has 88 quarterbacks listed. But in the wide receiver rankings, he has a little bit different of an opinion on one of the guys that we've talked about a lot in Emeka Egbuka. And Dane Brugler's from Ohio. He always has really good Ohio State information. But if you look at these rankings, he has Emeka Egbuka as his number 4 wide receiver, and he has Luther Burden as his number 3. And you can see that right there. Luther Burden is his number 3 guy. And I started reading a little bit about what Dane had to say about why he likes Burden more than Ibuka. And it got me to thinking, like, is this a possibility with the Texans? Could the Texans, while we're talking about Ibuka and we're having all this discussion about the connections with CJ Stroud, the right kind of guy, all that type of stuff, is Luther Burden being slept on? And if so, why? Is it just about one good year? And this is his bottom line about Luther Burden. And he talks about his strengths. He says he has above average foot speed for a 206 pounder. Talks about how dangerous he is with the ball in his hands. A weird thing last year is he had just 10 catches of 20 yards or more, which for someone that explosive is a little bit crazy. Also talks about perhaps a lack of interest on some routes, fumbling, below average production, but really just a bad 2024. But his bottom line on Burden is overall Burden is still working on his degree in route setup and separation, but he holds a master's in creating with the ball in his hands because of his explosive speed and his competitive toughness. For an NFL team targeting a yak weapon with upside to be more, he will be an appealing option early. So that's something to really keep an eye on. He likes Luther Burden. Now, with Emeka Egbuka, he likes a lot about Emeka Egbuka, says he's going to be solid. Still has him as a first-round grade, but he says overall Egbuka is a very quarterback-friendly target, not because he's bigger, stronger, or faster than defenders, but because he understands details and is able to uncover and command the catch points. Though he can line up outside, he says he's more like a Rashee Rice slot type of guy where he can play in multiple offenses. So that's his take. Dane Brugler, guy who I respect, not just some rando. He has Luther Burden ahead of Emeka Egbuka. And whether you think that's true or not, if it's even close, then maybe that kind of changes the way you feel about where the Texans are sitting at 25, because right now there's kind of a feeling that there's going to be no wide receivers there. And maybe I'm not saying that everyone else has, but I've focused heavily on three guys, and maybe Luther Burden is someone to keep an eye on for the Texans. Now, I don't care about this complimenting stuff. I know there's been talk about complimenting Nico Collins and just get as many ballers as possible and get the best players. I'm not worried about the complimenting, especially with the way this wide receiver room is. Furthermore, I think Christian Kirk is a much different receiver than Nico Collins. But the Burden Egbuka thing might be something that we need to keep a closer eye on. And maybe the fact that Burden had such a bad 2024, maybe that is kind of something that's maybe just too fresh on our minds. And we must have forgot. Because this time last year, if Luther Burden's in the draft, we're talking about Luther Burden, or when we're talking about the early draft, we're talking about Luther Burden completely different. Swarming to the super chat, Risque Barber, my guy. You ain't never hate. Swarm. He says FanDuel has the odds for the Texans' first draft pick at O lineman minus 230, wide receiver plus 380, D lineman plus 550, and RB plus 2,200. Which position do you think has the most value? That's a crazy one right there. O lineman obviously has no value. I would say wide receiver or running back. If I had $20, I would throw 10 on the wide receiver at 3.8, so 10 to win 38. And then I would throw 10 on the running back, 22 to win the 220. That's the value that I would use if I were throwing it around. I think it's assumed that it's going to be offensive line. I think it's somewhat safe, but I'm assuming that if Risque Barber is going that deep into the odds, that minus 230 bets probably aren't his thing. Appreciate you for swarming the super chat, my friend. Appreciate you. Atlas Max says, Landry, just wanted to say I really enjoy your content. Great coverage of the Texans. Appreciate it, man. We're on the scene. We're on the scene. We're in the mix. We're there all the time. And I appreciate you for coming through. Shout out to I Must Pandaline. She said she's here from Stutz's thing. Peace Dog. Shout out to you. TXX talking about Banks. There was another interesting thing from Banks that Brugler had, the beast. The listing of Banks was as a guard. He had him as his number 2 guard. Now, he didn't crap on him as a tackle, but he praised his ability to perhaps play guard and had him as the number 2 guard behind Booker, who we've agreed that the Texans are going to love just when they talk to him. It's a Will Anderson vibe on the other side of the rock. But he had Banks as a guard, not necessarily a tackle, but he didn't really crap on his tackle skills. Just pointed out some of the flaws. So who the hell knows what they're going to do there? But I do find it interesting that Dane Brugler likes Burden more than Ibuka, especially given the fact that he's kind of an Ohio guy. Find that very interesting. Now, as far as the pick itself, I do wonder, do Caserio and D'Amico want the same thing? In other words, I think it's fine if they don't. I don't think this is like the worst thing. But what is D'Amico thinking and what is Caserio thinking? And it's kind of unfamiliar territory for each of these guys. And I go back to when D'Amico first got here and they went to the offensive system that D'Amico was familiar with. And Caserio kind of took a step back. He admitted he didn't really know the system, said he was kind of new to him. And I guess D'Amico, Bobby Slowick, they tried to take over and do what they needed to do. Looked good until it didn't. And 2 years later, they're looking for a new offensive coordinator. But you saw Caserio kind of take a step back. D'Amico's the CEO of this whole thing. He's the CEO of the franchise. He's the CEO of the organization. Does D'Amico take a step back because he doesn't know this offense? And maybe because Caserio does? Then maybe he has a little bit more to do with what they do on offense? Because I very strongly doubt, and this could be more of a Caley thing than a Caserio thing. How much of a say does Nick Caley have? That's another thing. This is an offensive coordinator who's never been an offensive coordinator. We don't know what the system is. Hell, it might not have any wrinkles of the New England system that Nick Caserio knows. So you can maybe just dump everything that I just said. But how much of a say does Caley have? Because let's just put it this way. If the Texans are looking on the defensive side of the rock and they want to make a pick, how much do you think Nick Caserio really pushes back when D'Amico wants a guy? I'm sure the scouts have opinions, but do you think Nick Caserio is going to push back with one of the best defensive minds in the game? A guy who's established himself as someone who can coach up guys at every layer of defense. How much do you think he really steps in? On the other hand, D'Amico Ryans, you're 2 years into being a head coach. Your first offensive coordinator, it was a failure. It wasn't like an overwhelming failure. You had some good times, but the damn it, Bobby drop is kind of hanging by a thread. It's still fun.
Damn it, Bobby.
It's not as relevant because it didn't work out. So does that mean D'Amico kind of takes a step back and lets Caserio and Caley decide what they want to do on offense? Or is D'Amico still the guy that's going to have the strongest opinion? Now, obviously, it's a fluid conversation. It's a round table. I'm sure there's some give and take. But you got to wonder, given the fact that D'Amico has kind of established himself as, I don't want to say one-dimensional, but there is a huge gap between what they do and what they have put together on defense versus what they've done on offense. So does that mean that D'Amico Ryans takes a step back, and how much of a say does Nick Caley have? I think it would be natural for D'Amico Ryans to probably trust these guys a little bit. How much? Who knows? Because he's the one that's going to have to answer to it. So who knows what happens with that when it comes to their decision making, when it comes to a wide receiver, running back, etc. Fifth Ward Texans says, the more I think about it, we don't need wide receiver help. That's one of the dumber things I've heard and read in the offseason. No disrespect. Appreciate you for rolling through. But that's crazy. What do you mean you don't need wide receiver help? You have very little depth at wide receiver. You have two guys at the very top who get hurt consistently, Nico Collins and Christian Kirk. And then you have two guys in John Mechie and Xavier Hutchinson who have failed to step up when called upon at the highest level. There's a spark here or there. And you have two guys in Watson and Berrios who maybe they make the team, maybe they don't. So don't think too much. I think there is some danger in overthinking and thinking too much. I would limit the thinking if I were you, Fifth Ward Texans, 2002. I would kind of step back from that. They definitely need wide receiver help. Now, are they desperate enough to where they just draft for need? Hopefully not, but they definitely need some help at wide receiver in a big, big way. Speaking of thinking, I've been talking a lot about these running backs, and I've been talking a lot about Omarion Hampton, Trey Henderson. I know Caleb Johnson visited the Texans the other day. He had that on his Instagram story. I saw someone put that up. But there's another guy that I think perhaps we've talked about, but I just haven't really entertained as much as I am. And this is a culmination of a lot of things. This is a culmination of where the Texans are drafting. And I think there's a possibility that the top two backs that we've mentioned the most are gone in Hampton and Genty. We know for certain Genty's gone, but Hampton, it seems like there's a possibility that he's gone. And we know that at 58, you're kind of in no man's land, and there's a lot of variables that could happen before you get there. And we also anticipate that there could be a running back run in the second round. He visited the Texans, and we don't know how he fits into what they do because we don't know what they're going to do on offense. But I'm starting to really, really kind of buy in to Judkins. I'm really starting to buy in to Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State and Ole Miss. And I'll explain this. And I think this picture is important. I think this picture is really important. Because in the background, you see the Judkins that we saw on the big stage this year. The beast out of Ohio State, who was a compliment to Trey Henderson. Two guys who are going to go in the top 2 rounds, most likely. And then at the very front, you see the guy out of Ole Miss who transferred to Ohio State because he wanted to win a national championship. And I asked myself this question as I was reading the beast, and I'll give you some more interesting facts about Quinshon Judkins that I found interesting. But I asked myself this question as I was thinking about Judkins. What if he had just stayed at Ole Miss for all 3 seasons? In other words, what if we didn't, like the last time we saw him, we weren't looking at him as a complimentary back? What will we be saying about him? Because I think there's kind of a natural tendency when he's on the bigger stage, and let's be honest, Ole Miss is cool, but it's not Ohio State. And we see him winning national championship, see him scoring 3 touchdowns against Notre Dame, and naturally you kind of look at him as kind of a complimentary back. You know, Henderson's being asked to catch the ball more. Judkins isn't being asked to do that. And you naturally kind of wonder, but then you go back and look at what he did at Ole Miss before he went to Ohio State. And in year 1, he had 1,567 yards rushing, and he had 1,158 yards rushing the next year. And he had 31 touchdowns combined in those 2 seasons. He also, in the last 2 seasons, the Ohio State, he caught 22 passes. So he's decent at catching the rock. He had 5 receiving touchdowns in the last 3 years. So that's kind of that kind of resembles an all-purpose type of back. He has 50 career touchdowns, 45 on the ground. Last year at Ohio State, as part of a duo, he rushed for over 1,000 yards and he had 14 touchdowns. So I almost wonder if him going to Ohio State has me kind of looking at him as like a guy who's a complimentary back instead of a guy that we've already seen carry a full workload like he did at Ole Miss. Then you start looking more into Judkins and just kind of what kind of guy he is, what kind of player he is, because D'Amico said it the other day, and we used to hear Bill O'Brien say it in cringe, but tough, smart, dependable is what's always mentioned with the Patriot way and all that type of stuff. And we hear that all the time. Tough, smart, dependable, blah, 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 blah. We hear all that. Well, we know that he's tough. We see the way that he runs. We know he's pretty dependable. He hasn't been injured. There's no weaknesses. Like he's not injured at all. He's inconsistent in pass protection, according to Dane Brugler, but he has the capability to figure it out. And they say he needs to be a little bit more decisive when deciding where to cut and all that. Brugler says overall Judkins isn't as dynamic as other backs in this class. He did have pretty good combine. He said, but he's an attitude runner with the quickness, vision, and violence to be a productive lead option in an NFL backfield. He can help secure his spot on a depth chart by taking his passing down responsibilities from serviceable to above average. So he's got to work on that. He's got to figure that out. Keep in mind, we're talking about a guy that was willing to leave Ole Miss because he wanted to win. So I think the dependable and the tough, I think that is 100% unquestioned. So we can check that. Dependable, tough. What about the smart? And this was something that I thought was interesting in reading the Dane Brugler stuff. So he graduated high school early in order to go to Ohio State, which I guess you can say that's not too common. His dad is a business owner and his mom's an attorney. So he's obviously growing up with pretty smart role models that he speaks very highly of. Then I looked at his college list. And this is where I realized, okay, this guy must be pretty damn smart. And this is something that I think Nick Caserio likes, and this is something that I think D'Amico Ryans likes. Just the dependability and the toughness, we can already check that off. Just the production, we can already check that off and say this guy has some skills. And then you also factor in that he's already been the workload guy, and then he's been the team guy. And I think that matters as well. But listen to this final 7 list of teams that that Judkins had on his list of teams that were giving him offers to play college. Okay. Auburn. Okay. Makes sense. Florida. Okay. Makes sense. Michigan. Okay. Makes sense. Penn State. Okay. Makes sense. Notre Dame. Okay. Makes sense. Ole Miss, where he ended up going. You know what the final school on his list was that he had offers from and he almost went to? It was Yale. So it's pretty safe to say that the son of an attorney and a business owner who graduated high school early is a pretty smart dude. So Yale was on that list as well. There's just a lot of things that I'm starting to like about this guy. And the other thing is, maybe it's a trade up, maybe it's a trade back, but he just seems like a guy that is potentially going to be there, and he seems like a guy that they might like. And he also seems like a guy that we might be sleeping on just because of what we've seen recent. And I think we can bring this back to how we started this conversation. A lot of times it's prisoner of the moment type of thing. Luther Burden, Dane Brugler still has him ranked ahead of Emeka Egbuka. Emeka Egbuka just won a national championship at Ohio State. Luther Burden just had a very disappointing year, especially for someone that talented. He was a top 3 recruit in the nation coming out of college. So we saw that, and automatically it's like, not a top 3 guy in a weak-ass wide receiver group. Like, let's be serious. This is a weak-ass wide receiver group. You see Judkins at Ohio State, you don't necessarily think of him. Now, he would be a compliment immediately. So he kind of did a good job in that role, although Henderson's kind of a different style back than Mixon. But he also happened to do his thing at Ole Miss. So maybe there's some prisoner of the moment type of stuff there. I'm pretty fascinated by the possibility of Judkins. Maybe it's what we spoke of earlier. Maybe it's too much information. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I'm a fan. I like what he's got going. I like what he may bring to the table. And I like the possibility of getting him. I still like Trey Henderson. I still like Omarion Hampton. But you can add Judkins on my list. The Caleb Johnson thing is interesting. Caleb Johnson was a guy who didn't fumble at all last season. I thought that was an interesting nugget. Now, he did gain 10 pounds from the combine to the pro day. I don't know what to really make of that. But that was a note that I kind of made on Dane Brugler's the Beast documentation, the running back section. But Caleb Johnson, another guy they visited. But I like Judkins more than Caleb Johnson. Back to the super chat. Doyle has something to say. You ain't never hate. Swarm. Says Gray Zabel last season, the chat wanted a corn-fed white kid to anchor the line. This is that kid. Race car! Jerome Kicks was the one who said that. And Jerome Kicks is an African-American dude. He said we needed more white guys on the offensive line. I would still take a Booker, but that is definitely, if you want to say the honky corn-fed white dude, I will say that dude kind of fits the billing. He was also on Instagram in the video that Caleb Johnson put up. So he has visited the Texans as well. I would think that would be a 2nd round pick, maybe 3rd. But yeah, he was on that video. Other running back notes that I found interesting. And this is going further down the list. We've already talked about the guys at the top, but I thought this was an interesting nugget on Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee. So he wears number 6 because he says he models his game after Alvin Kamara. In his 1 year as a starter, this is all pretty easy knowledge. He was the SEC Offensive Player of the Year in 2024. But I thought this was the interesting nugget from him. I think this is impressive. I think this is a big flex. So he grew up in Louisiana, and he went to the same high school as the Reed brothers, Jordan Reed and Justin Reed. Landon Collins also went there, and so did Eddie Lacy. And he was the first non-kicker to play varsity as a freshman. That's a hell of a flex. Like, it's one thing to say I went to the same high school, I played high school ball where these guys played, but I was the only one to start as a freshman. I think that's a nice little flex right there for him. But I find that a little bit interesting. Backstreet says it doesn't matter. Ryan Fitzpatrick went to Harvard. He was smart as hell. What do you mean it matters now? That's an excellent. Ryan Fitzpatrick was smart as hell. Smart player. And then some other running backs that were mentioned. I did find it interesting that Trevor Etienne only carried the ball 20 plus times once. You kind of look at him and you think of as reliable. And I think Dane Brugler kind of described him as that, but he only carried the ball 20 plus times. Seemed like he was at Georgia for a while, not really asked to be a workhorse. That's kind of the running back stuff that stuck out with the Beast. I'm open to the Judkins thing. I think you could talk me into the Judkins thing. Big time. I think the Texans might like him too. I do think Booker is going to be the guy that they like a lot. Now, moving on to wide receivers, we already talked about Burden. We already talked about Ibuka. We've been talking about Ibuka all year. Burden did have 85.3% of his snaps were in the slot, which I don't think scares them. I think that was interesting. The Tet McMillan controversy that kind of emerged courtesy of this channel. The quote from Dane Brugler was he actually said heading into last season he needed to grow up and fix things. Talking about some of the sluggish moments on the field. So Tet McMillan, the talk about maturity and football and stuff, direct quote from him, he said he needed to fix things. So that's there. The other really interesting thing about this this run of prospects is that this is the real COVID impact group where a lot of these guys that are really good, like they were 3-star or 4-star. I think it was probably really tough to talk about, to do recruiting with these guys coming out of high school. And I think it kind of shows. Higgins is one of the guys. We talked about Higgins yesterday. Higgins is one of the guys who didn't really fully commit to football till later on in his high school career. And that was right in the middle of COVID. So he was already not really on the radar when it came to recruiting. And basketball, he was one of the best basketball players in South Florida. He ended up taking up football and just wasn't that highly recruited. He went to Eastern Kentucky and then he ended up going to Iowa State. So I think the impact of COVID, where these high school kids are having their senior years canceled and they're not being recruited as closely and they don't get to play and all that, I think that kind of impacts them, especially when you think about it this way. Like, most of you went to high school, and I'm sure most of you played sports. Like, there is a massive jump from sophomore year to junior year, freshman year to junior year, sophomore to senior year, like when it comes to development. And if during those developmental years, you're having to do whatever the hell they were making them do during COVID, and they were limiting all this stuff. Like, a lot of times these guys go under the radar. Like, Tyler Warren was a 3-star prospect. And it seemed like a lot of these guys were 3-star prospects that it's just like, what? And then there's some of them that didn't even play like their senior year of high school. I think Trey Henderson's one of those guys, although he was still really highly recruited. So I think the COVID impact you can kind of see in the scouting and evaluation. Other thing that I find myself doing, and I brought this up on S&L, is with a lot of these guys like that are back end running backs and back end receivers, like the fact that they might have returned kicks or punts and punts maybe, but like they return kicks. I don't know that it matters anymore in the NFL because it's such a different format. So that's kind of unfortunate. Like, I don't know, like, as far as playing your way onto a team through special teams, I don't want to say those days are done, but it's definitely a lot more difficult. Like, are you just going to have the reliable punt returner? Like, the days of the specialist, it feels like unless someone just masters this new format, and maybe eventually that happens, the days of the specialist, the days of this guy's going to make the team because of kickoff return, they might be done. Or they've at least changed a lot. Because averaging 30, 31, 32, 28 yards on kickoff return in college, it doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL. And we've seen, like, over the course of times, like, this system doesn't translate. This style doesn't translate. This player doesn't translate. Kick returning is not the same thing. So some of these guys who are doing that, it really just, it doesn't matter as much. Maybe it does, but I don't see why it would, because it's completely different. For the evaluators and stuff. And that's got to be weird for Dane Brugler to talk about. Other Nuggets, I mentioned this. He has Booker as guard number 1. He has Banks as guard number 2. Although he doesn't completely dismiss the possibility of Banks playing tackle, I think the fact that he listed him as a guard kind of says all that needs to be said, to say the very least. Those are just a few nugs from the Beast. If you want to check it out, you should. I think Dane Brugler tweeted it out. Adam Schefter's tweeted it out. It's one of the best resources. And it's damn sure nice not having to look at the quarterbacks and all that. So he has Booker at number 1 guard and Banks at number 2. And that's as far as I go with the guards. Just tell me who the guards are and we can figure some stuff out. Other news with the Texans. So I mentioned that Caleb Johnson visited the Texans. So did Kyle Williams, the wide receiver out of Washington State, teammate of Cam Ward. So you got to wonder if Tennessee is interested in bringing those two together. I don't know. I feel like Kyle Williams has gotten a little bit of mention with the Texans. I know he's visiting the Texans. I think the meeting was today, if I'm not mistaken. I think Albert Breer brought it up. I don't like Kyle Williams that much. I mean, he's fine, but if he's like your answer as like a young wide receiver, if Kyle Williams is the top wide receiver they take, I don't feel any better about the wide receivers after the draft than I did heading into. I'm not big on Kyle Williams. I don't think I don't think he moves the needle one way or the other. I don't even know that he's really better than Watson. I know he's not better than Kirk. I don't know that he's going to be better than Hutchinson even coming into camp. I'm not big on this Kyle Williams stuff, but it does seem like maybe it's just because he's another name and it's a realistic goal, but Kyle Williams is a no-go for me. Stranger things have happened than Kyle Williams ending up being a good player, but he's a no-go for me. That's just me, though. I'm sure there's some people who love Kyle Williams. I'm sure he's getting some hype. I think Brugler has him as his number. Let me look. 523 pages. Good Lord. Brugler and the Beast has Kyle Williams as his number 12. Has him as a 3rd-round value. He did run the 4.4. Let's see what he has to say. Let's just get the bottom line on his summary of Kyle Williams. There's a lot of information on him. He says, overall, Williams might not stand out with his size or play strength, but he compensates for that with his ability to accelerate to top gear rapidly and create catchable windows for his quarterback. With more seasoning, he can become a wide receiver 2 or 3 for an NFL offense. So, yeah, that's a guy who sounds kind of developmental. It sounds like a high-end developmental guy. And high-end developmental guys have ended up being pretty solid players in the NFL. So if you like Kyle Williams, I mean, I don't think anyone saw that Puka was going to do what he did, but if you like Kyle Williams, I'm sure you feel good. I'm not very high on him. It wouldn't excite me at all. Not big on that at all. I did find it interesting with the wide receivers. And I saw a couple of mentions here from Brugler that I wanted to bring up. He did compare Restrepo to Julian Edelman. He said that he was tougher than a $2 steak, said he lacks athleticism but makes up for it with toughness. 76.8% of his catches went for a first down or touchdown, and he had a 2% drop rate. He had the Julian Edelman comparison. Now, why am I bringing up the Julian Edelman comparison? Because Julian Edelman was in New England when obviously Caserio was there, but he was also there when Nick Caley was there. And in Nick Caley's first year, they were actually kind of using Wes Welker and Julian Edelman quite often. The year before, they ended up drafting Gronk and Hernandez and kind of transformed into one of the best 1-2 punches that we've ever seen at the tight end position. And then after the Aaron Hernandez thing went down, they kind of went into the 2 slot guys again, and you had Edelman and Amendola. So it might be a race card. Race card! But there was an Edelman comparison, and I just think that's kind of interesting because it seemed like New England damn near every year was trying to find that type of thing. So I would check that out. Another interesting thing, and I think some people might like this, because after the Senior Bowl, this guy was a very popular name. Jack Besh out of TCU by way of Louisiana. Brugler had an interesting line about him in The Beast. And at the end of it, he said the following quote: "When you're done reading this, he got another lift in." So in other words, this guy likes to work out. This guy likes to work hard. We know the Texans kind of value that. So he got another lift in. Talked about his inside and outside experience, and there was a comparison to Puka, who Nick Caley knows quite well. So there was a little bit of a Puka comp. So when you start wondering what Nick Caley's offense is, and you think, okay, well, maybe he wants to use slot guys, 2 guys who he knows very well and who he saw perform at really high levels during his 2 stops in the NFL, Julian Edelman and Puka. Now, maybe this is one of those situations where every white or slow receiver gets compared to that, which could very well be the case. See Josh Allen every year. One of these jamokes is comparing some half-assed quarterback prospect to Josh Allen. But you have a Puka comparison with Besh, and you have a Edelman comparison with Restrepo. Do with that what you will. Do with that what you will. But that's pretty much what stuck out there. Maybe get into a little bit more of the tight end stuff a little bit later on. But the tight end thing, kind of in no man's land there. That's probably a day 3 conversation, quite honestly. And we don't need to have day 3 conversations 15 days out of the draft. We can go day 2. Day 3, we actually want some sort of entertainment value. So no thank you to that. Final thing here before I get out of here. Be sure to like the video. Be sure to be on the lookout for the big draft announcement with myself and Cody Stutes. And be sure to buckle up, because tomorrow we're going to be 2 weeks out. Oh, yeah, by the way, 1 week from tomorrow, John Harris, the night stream, the draft night stream that everybody likes, we will do that next Thursday. So next Thursday, John Harris, have your questions ready, have the super chats ready. This is going to be the ultimate cram session. The Beast is the pre-cram session. Harris here, we're going to hold his feet to the fire, and we're going to see what the hell he's got to say. So it's going to be fun. Put your seatbelt on. It's about to get real. Starting next Thursday. Don't forget John Harris. Don't forget the draft party. Hope you're thirsty for that, because we got some big news on that. And always remember, when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. The last show before 2 weeks or less till the draft. Appreciate y'all for coming through. Remember, like the damn video.